please.
Hello, welcome to I'm Back Southwest Lockdown Go 1. We said it would happen, and blow me down, it has happened. Now, I'm thinking to myself, if you thought old Travis Scott, if Travis Scott doing his event on Fortnite was a banger, well, you're in for a treat with this, because we've got some great speakers this afternoon, all sorts of things to keep you kind of entertained and inspired, we hope, for the next hour. I will admit, from wherever you are in the world, we welcome you. It's not a typical I'll be back, of course, because when we do such a thing, we normally do it in a room in Bristol, but in a funny sort of way, it's a wonderful opportunity to welcome all sorts of new faces, because literally you can join us from anywhere in the world. Speaking of which, obviously we talk at such an event about the intersection of creativity, AI and advertising. That's pretty much what this is about, and we get some really fascinating, interesting speakers. And today we've got the opportunity. We don't normally get the chance to ask questions because so much happens, but because we've got a little bit more time and space and breathing room, you can actually, there's a little chat facility. So if you do have some questions, we can do some at the end. So that's all cool. I will say, I will do a little demo to show you that, you know, some of the tricks. I've got to do my little move here, because obviously if you've got this ability of virtual cameras, you can do all sorts of cool stuff, can't you? Because you can do that, maybe. That kind of works, doesn't it? In a funny sort of way. I can put a tire on that kind of makes me more appropriate to my Norwegian fisherman garb that I'm wearing. I can even place myself, yeah, you see, lockdown's over, or at least a couple of those types are there. It's all well and good. I'm on the Falcon. We just carry on this all afternoon, but I don't suppose you've come here for that, so I'm going to bring myself back to that on screen. So let me just explain to you what's going to happen today. Probably enough of my prattling. Tony Giant, co-founder and co-host of events. Kerry Harrison is going to do a little talk in about 5 minutes, talking about AI and COVID. And many interesting things that are happening in the world. After that, we have our two speakers, and we're very honoured and privileged to have Hannah Marcus, strategist at Discover AI, with us, and we also have Paul Bailey, strategy director at Halo. So they're going to both speak for probably 15 minutes or so on particular topics, which hopefully will keep you excited, engaged. And like I say, if we have an opportunity to, if you want to ask some questions to them, well, it's more than happy to do so. So I think, to be honest, normally in these I'll be back events, and Kay will attest to this, I'll normally prattle on for way longer, but you don't need to today. Let's let the Zoom court do the talking, and I'd like to hand over now to my co-host, Kerry Harrison. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you. Hi everyone. It's so nice to see so many faces. Yeah, thanks very much for being here. I know it's crazy times right now, and it's really difficult for a load of people. It's really nice that we've been able to bring this online and just to reconnect with everyone again, because we absolutely love our community that we've created, and we love seeing you all. So it's just nice to have you all here. So thank you for giving us your time. If anyone who hasn't been to one of the events in person, I normally do 5 minutes or so at the beginning of the event. I just normally either have a rant about something, talk about AI in the news, or sometimes share some of the stuff that we've been doing at Tiny Giant. So today it seemed relevant for me to talk about the news and COVID-19, and specifically how AI is helping in the crisis. So I'm going to get onto my presentation. I'll share my screen with you, and then I'll come back afterwards. Right, just bear with me. Can everyone see my screen? Norts, can you see my screen? Wrong one.
We can see it.
You can see it, thank you. I'm just gonna make it bigger. Oh, here we go. Cool. So how AI is helping in the COVID-19 crisis. So AI obviously has huge potential to help in this kind of scenario and in this crisis at the minute. What I also want to say is that humans are going to be also really fundamental in this whole process. So the amazing thing about AI is that it can identify patterns in data much quicker than we could. It can analyze huge amounts of data really, really quickly and spot things. But not only that, it can probably also spot a load of things that maybe we wouldn't be able to see ourselves. So it has this amazing potential. The thing thing with AI is it's actually very specific in what it can do. So you can only really train it on a very narrow space. And that's great. So if you've got something in mind that you want to do, then AI is perfect at helping you to get there quicker. But the thing at the moment is that AI needs a huge amount of data, and it also needs relevant examples in that data as well. And interestingly, it also assumes, as you'd expect, that what you give it is what is currently happening right now. So it can't really decipher between historical data and current data because it only knows what you give it. And the thing at the moment is that the COVID-19 crisis is completely new. So we've never seen this kind of strain of the virus ourselves, and therefore it's very difficult to train an AI specifically in this space because we just don't have that kind of data. But interestingly, humans are pretty amazing at doing things on a wider scale. So we can take learnings from one space and apply them in a new sphere. And at the moment, AI is not able to do that. It's very good in a very narrow space, but not so good at transferring that to a much wider application. But as humans, we can do that. And I think there's quite a lot of things going on at the moment with AI where humans and AI are working really effectively together. So I wanted to explore that. But one of the things we need to do really, if we want to really tap into the capabilities of AI right now, is to gather data. And we really need to do that, not just for us so that we can learn more, but also so we can start training the neural networks and the algorithms to really help us. So the more quickly that we can share information and the more quickly the situation becomes less novel, the more quickly that we'll be able to find solutions. So what collaborations are happening right now? There's an awful lot in the news about AI supporting the COVID-19 crisis. And I have to say that a lot of the stuff I've read, I just was not sure whether it was actually real or whether the things that they're talking about are actually possible. So I've been really careful in what I've chosen, and I've chosen 3 examples from 3 reputable organizations that I feel are making some kind of headway in this space. So the first one is, it's actually a startup and it's called Blue Dot, and they are based in Canada, and they have created some disease surveillance analytics program. They're using natural language processing and machine learning techniques to sift through news reports, airline data, and also things like disease outbreaks in animals. So quite a big space. But they're also working with epidemiologists as well, which is really interesting. So not only are those epidemiologists helping to shape the creation of the models themselves, but they're also validating what comes out the other end as well, which is a really important aspect when you're talking in this space. I read an article in Wired the other day about Blue Dot, and it was saying there that, interestingly, they were able to tell their clients that the outbreak was happening in Wuhan before even the World Health Organization. So there is already proof that this kind of stuff is working and is very much possible. And it'd be interesting to see how they start developing this software and how it can help us to potentially mitigate exposure to diseases going forward. So I think that's a really nice example. No surprise here that MIT are all over the situation. They are using AI to help to predict when infections in each country might slow depending on the measures of the government in that country. So that's what we're doing, so a prediction model. So they've taken lots of data from the disease and how it's moving and cross-reference that with the data about the government's actions, and then created a really solid model. What's interesting about this one is that they've actually used live and current data. So they've only got 3 months worth at the moment that they've used for this model, but it's good to see that people are actually starting to harness some form of data and do something with it that's beneficial. And what they really want to do here is to sort of share this model, and they have shared this model with other researchers in the hope that it will shape quarantine strategies going forward. The last one is Google DeepMind. They've been using AI to study and understand the protein structures of the virus. This, as you can imagine, is normally a really painstaking process, but they've been able to make predictions about the protein structures a lot quicker than we would have been able to do without the machine learning. And again, they have released this to the wider community in the hope that it will help to develop a vaccine quicker. So again, really nice examples there. what I'm hoping these examples show is that it's not just tech alone that's going to make a difference here. Yes, it's amazing what AI can do. It's going to be really helpful that it can analyze this data really quick for us and help create really brilliant prediction models. But it's also humans that are going to be really important here. We have to draw on the information and on the models so that we can then apply it in new spaces. And we also have to draw on lots of different people in different areas. So not just the technologists, but also the epidemiologists, the creatives that can apply it to new spaces. So it's really tapping into a much wider community to make it happen. I read an article at the weekend about the fears of vaccine nationalism and how the vaccine is creating a sense of nationalism in a lot of countries, and also how the dangers are in developing a vaccine. So how will it be shared out when it's eventually created, and will the supplies go to the highest bidder, and are rich nations even buying up potential vaccines already? So I think I feel that to really make progress with COVID-19 and to tap into the capabilities of AI, it's not just going to be about AI and human collaboration, but also the collaboration between human and human. And put simply, we just have to work together. I found this really lovely quote in an article by the Financial Times, which was written by Yuval Noah Harari, who is amazing. If you haven't read his books, I'd definitely have a look and check it out. But he wrote this really lovely article about the importance of global solidarity. And I thought this would be a really nice quote to end with, but this is what it's all about. So yes, technology is amazing. We can do some great stuff with it, but we also have to collaborate and work together if we really want to push forward and make a difference in this crisis and also going forward too. So that's me. That's my little rant, my little talk. But yeah, that's where we're at. So thank you very much. I will now pass over to Hannah. So Hannah is a strategist, as Norts said, at Discover AI in London. They are a company that are using AI to facilitate and speed up the research process. So really looking forward to Hannah's talk, and Hannah, we're really grateful for you for being here, so thank you very much. I will now hand over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was really interesting, so thank you for that. Hello everyone, it's really nice to be here. I'm a bit sad I didn't get to do the trip to Bristol that I was quite excitedly planning. I don't leave London much, I guess, prior to this, but it's nice to get to do it in some other form. And so yeah, as Kerry said, I work for Discover AI, and we're a startup that have been working on using AI, or sort of more accurately machine learning technology, to really speed up the research process. But obviously this is a session about creativity and AI, and quite a lot of the projects that we do go directly into sort of research to help creative development and sort of creative briefs. So I've picked a really nice case study that is a project that I did for Asahi about trying to understand Japanese modernity in order to feed into a creative campaign that they're going to be released. Well, they were planning on releasing it sort of sometime this spring, so I'm not quite sure whether that's been delayed by this, but hopefully it will be coming out quite soon and you'll actually see it in real life. And I presented this case study at a conference with the client a little while ago, so I am allowed to share it because it is sort of all publicly out there. But what's quite nice as well is that one of the things that he sort of says when he was presenting it was that he showed the research to the creatives who were working on the project, and they actually said, thank you, this research is really useful, which we sort of don't hear very often from creatives when we do research. So it would be interesting to see what you guys think about it. So what I'll do is I'll just sort of tell you guys a little bit about our methodology and then use the case study to sort of explain what it does. And then, as Kerry said, we can, or John Norts said, we can have questions at the end. So we have been going for about 2.5 years now, and we were set up by a guy called Jonathan Williams, who'd come from a background sort of really people-based consultancy, and he'd co-founded a couple of agencies that you may or may not be familiar with, one called Clear, which is now part of M&C, and one called MASH, which is now part of the big Kantar thing that exists. And he was getting really frustrated with kind of the fact that when you try to do sort of really interesting exploratory research projects, you would have a really interesting question, and what you'd want was the answer to that question, but what you'd actually the client would be paying for would be sort of all of the process and logistics of going out and interviewing people and that sort of thing. So his thing was kind of, how could we use AI or sort of machine learning technology to accelerate that process as quickly as possible and sort of get from A to B much more quickly. So the kind of very premise of our company was about combining AI and human expertise to sort of work together to create these answers. So we sort of say that when people sometimes come to us and ask, well, of this project you've done, well, how much was the AI and how much was the human? And what we always like to say is that it's actually 100% the human, but just accelerated by the machine. And then at that point, I usually have a little crisis about how I have a job that requires me to define myself as a human publicly, but I am one. That is part of my role. So I'll share my screen to kind of chat you through that process a little bit. Can you guys all see that okay? Has that shown? Yeah, great. So the way that we work essentially is we start by defining a single question that we think summarizes the particular challenge. And so it could be, what does Japanese modernity mean, or what does it mean to give time back to people? But questions that really sit in that sort of intractable, abstract, cultural, creative space. So we sometimes like to say, you know, you can, and I'm aware there are people who know more about AI than me in this room who might disagree, but you can teach a machine to play chess, but you can't necessarily get it to tell you why people play chess or sort of how to get them to play more chess. So we sort of want to sit in that more cultural questioning space. So you create a question which does nothing to the technology whatsoever. It's literally just an analytical framework that we use to do the analysis. We have a team of people who do the analysis, so those are the aforementioned humans. And then what's a really interesting thing, what we think is really interesting is the next part of our process that can actually be really creative, is we use a process of sampling sources to get the data to feed into the machine. So it's not like a kind of social listening model where you pipe in the whole of the internet. What we do is we curate a set of sort of bespoke picked sources that we think are going to be best placed to answer your particular question. And these will be sources that come across a mixture of sort of brand sites, cultural sites, magazines, consumer sites, blogs and forums. We will put in a little bit of social media, but it won't be the sort of main thing. And so it's a really interesting creative exercise thinking about where can I go to on the internet where I'm going to be able to find the answers I need, but also push them and stretch them in different directions. And so the examples I always like to give is we did a project on iced tea innovation, and it was about sort of premium iced tea and people wanting to come up with ideas for a new premium iced tea. So we put in lots of iced tea brands, we put in lots of sort of health and well-being sites and people talking about drinks and things like that. But then we thought, well, actually, let's put in premium ice cream, because there's probably a lot we can steal from the language of sort of coldness and things like that we can take across to iced tea. And then we pushed it even further and went, well, actually, what if we went to perfume? Because there's probably things that we could steal from the language of botanicals and infusions that we could take to be relevant to iced tea. So it's actually quite a creative exercise, sort of, but really sort of human creativity, thinking, well, where am I going to get that data from? And then another example might be, you know, this question of giving time back to people, which was actually for a washing up liquid brand that had a proposition around, you use our washing up liquid and it saves you 15 minutes, and with that 15 minutes you can transform your life, which is quite a lot to ask for a washing up liquid. But they then came to us and sort of wanted to find ways of talking about time that were a little bit more rooted in people's lives. But it's a really interesting challenge for us, because if you type in time into Google, you get a bunch of stuff about clocks and maybe about being late. So we had to think about going to places like bucket list blogs and gap year blogs and retirement communities and things like that to and things like that to and actually maybe even some sort of terminal illness forums and places where people were talking about the idea of time, but without necessarily using the word time. So it was a really interesting creative exercise. So when you've got all your sources, we put them into the machine, and then at this point we do actually have some AI happening. So it's takes quite a while to get there. So we put it into the platform. The platform downloads all of the data, and what it does is it cuts it up into thousands and thousands and thousands of quotes, and then it groups those quotes together and themes them using, we've got a natural language processing model that sits underneath the technology that sort of has how all language is related to other language. And so what happens is the platform takes those themes that it's created and it ranks them. But it's not a topic analysis. It's not sort of going, here are the 10 biggest themes. What it does is it ranks them based on proximity to something that we call a nudge term. So if I type in the word organic as a nudge term, it will start giving me themes like organic food and organic products because they're really closely related to the word organic. But then it will start giving me words like farm products or coconut oil or natural products or things like that, because it knows that semantically those words are related to the word organic without necessarily having the word organic in them. And so what we do is we use those nudge terms to put in different words and different hypotheses for our particular project, and search for and sort of see kind of what the machine organically pulls up that's a bit related to our project, that can create new hypotheses and spark new ideas. And then we'll click on the themes save the themes that we think are interesting, click on them, and then we can read all of the quotes that sit underneath those themes. And at that point, it just becomes an exercise, a bit like post-it noting in a workshop or something. You cluster together all of the quotes that you think are interesting, you name those clusters of quotes, and each of those cluster of quotes will become what we call a springboard. And so for every project, you start with one question and you end up with 10 to 15 of these springboards, which in this final column here, you can sort of see zoomed out what that looks like. So that's sort of how it works. And then I'll just very quickly, because I've already talked quite a lot, explain to you about this Asahi project, because I think it's a really nice example. So what happened was Asahi wanted to launch a new campaign really rooted in an idea of authentic Japaneseness. They'd had a couple of things happen where some campaigns had been released in Australia particularly that had a slightly cliched version of Japaneseness. There's sort of octopuses fighting robot samurai in a sort of, and it just was a little bit on the nose, particularly for the Japanese stakeholders. So they really wanted to make sure that they got their depiction of Japaneseness, a word I now use, I don't know if that's a word, but I use it. So they wanted to know whether they got their depiction of Japaneseness right. But they also wanted to make sure that it wasn't so kind of nichely Japanese that it wouldn't be understood in the markets that they were launching the product in. So it was a really interesting challenge for us, because they sort of came to us and said, well, we want to know how Japaneseness is understood in Hungary and in the UK and in the US, and ways in which it's similar and ways in which it's different, but also making sure that that's sort of authentically Japanese at the same time. And so what we did was we sort of gathered together lots of different sources about Japan, sort of Japanese cultural centers, Japanese restaurants, fashion and style, experts talking about Japan, but then also made sure that we put Japanese sources from Japan into the project so that we could root the things that we were finding in sort of what was coming out of Japan as well. And so we ended up with 17 different areas. It was quite a lot, which sort of varied from thinking about sort of fantastic dreamscapes and uncovering secrets, ones about sort of natural rhythms and colors and sort of being in line with the seasons, some which were more about technology. So a real kind of range of areas. And then what happened was the client was then able to go through those areas, discard the ones that felt like they weren't relevant for their particular brand. So ones that were more about sort of beauty and simplicity and minimalism, they were like, well, this is really interesting, but not what Asahi would want to position around. And then focus in on ones that felt much closer to to their brand, such as the kind of uncovering secrets or sort of ones about discovery and things like that. And I just sort of included an example of what a springboard looks like. So these would be sort of 10 quotes taken from across the different data. It will link back to, there's a sort of link that will take you back to the website that it's come from, so that you can kind of investigate further where that language has come from. And this area about uncovering secrets ended up being drawn on quite heavily for the final creative territory, because it was sort of taking this view of sort of like not trying to be a fetishistic view of mystery, but sort of thinking about this idea of uncovering something new and like constantly investigating new secrets and sort of what's beneath the surface wanting to be found, and sort of thinking about little twists of perception that just make you see something a little bit differently. And another thing we do is we download images from the same sites that the text has come from, and then we can provide visual mood boards that sort of illustrate that particular concept, which can be very useful if you're trying to then sort of take that concept to a creative, so it's not just a wall of text. And then the last thing I just wanted to show was that, so we initially did the project focusing on the UK and Hungary, and then we repeated it for South Korea, China, and the US and Australia, I think. And something that we found that was really interesting was that the themes that we had around sort of mystery and uncovering secrets and things like that were much less strong in the other sort of Asian markets than they were in the European and American markets. And we found that part of that was actually stemming from the geographical proximity of these markets, that meant that Japan just felt much less kind of far away and therefore much less mysterious than it does in some of the European markets. But instead of that, what we found was there was a whole area that hadn't emerged out of Europe around exuberant explorations, which was basically that, you know, for a lot of people, Japan is the place where you go to go skiing or to go to Disneyland or to go on a sort of like really exciting holiday. So actually there was this, to replace this idea of kind of uncovering something new and interesting, instead there was this sort of excitement and interaction. So that sort of so then they took those areas and then they took them into a broader piece of research, which was then refined into a campaign around sort of the joy of discovery, which is going to be released later in the year, so I can't talk too much about it. I've just talked a lot very quickly. And there are a couple of questions. So Kerry, I don't know if you want me to answer those now or save them for the sort of Q&A at the end of the thing.
It might be good to do a Q&A at the end just to keep it all together. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to give you a bit of applause because I've queued this up. So
thank you, and I've seen those questions, so we can.
Awesome. Yeah, I think let's do that at the end, and we'll move on. So I'll hand over to Norts.
Man alive, tell you what, we got some production values going on, haven't we? Eh? Hey, and we've got a bit of a costume budget as well, because look, I've got a man of many hats today and background. So thank you very much, Hannah. As I say, we'll do some questions at the end. What is kind of, I guess, what's nice about all gathering here virtually in the Zoom room for an I'll Be Back, there's two things come to mind. Number one, Hannah and Paul were actually going to speak at the I'll Be Back that we would have run in Bristol in March. So it's nice that we've actually have managed to procure them and get them here and speak to the world, which is nice to see it can actually happen. And I suppose the other thing, which we were talking before we actually came on at 4 o'clock, was the idea that I suppose what's quite joyful about doing it this way is that normally, and I'll Be Back at Southwest, you would probably make the case is almost exclusively kind of filled by people in the sort of Bristol Southwest environs, but this obviously extends us out into the world. So I see from this group, several of you, well, many of you, who are part of the Creative AI group on WhatsApp. It's great that you can kind of reach out and come in. And as I say, we've got the conversation thing, the chat thing, so have an opportunity. I'll say it once, and I'm sure Kerry's going to touch it on again. We put this on. We didn't necessarily know if people were going to turn up, but they seem to have done. And we're going to do another one on, I believe, May the 21st, which is, I'm correct in thinking, Kerry, 3 weeks today, isn't it? And we have some speakers. You can still get a ticket. It's on Eventbrite. I might put this, if I can work out the technology, I'll put it on the chat thing. But to be honest, it's pretty easy to find out where it's coming from if you'd like to come along. Anyway, like I said, Hannah and Paul were going to speak at our March event in Bristol. Not to happen, doesn't matter, we're here today. So I'm going to introduce Paul Bailey quickly, Strategy Director of Halo, before he comes on. I said before we started that Paul had we've met several times before. We've even done a podcast together, Paul, have we not? Probably about a year or so ago. But yeah, Paul's going to come on today. I'd say Strategy Director of Halo. If you've got your applause lined up again, Kerry, because I think we should. If we can make it work, why not? Let's go for broke. Paul, it's pretty much fair to say, welcome to you. The floor, Paul, is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I thought I was going to get clapped on there, so I was waiting for the clapping to come on, but don't worry, I'll get clapped off. It's fine. Yeah, Strategy Director from Halo here in Bristol. I'm going to be talking not about AI, but about data. So hopefully that's okay. And really about a little bit about the role of data for brand. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this works. Hold on. Okay, let's share this. Okay, so now I'll do the classic. Can everyone see that? Yep, good, excellent. So, okay. So really what I wanted to talk about, and it's probably going to be quite a short talk, but really it's about being creative with data. So, you know, for a number of years, we've been told, you know, this idea that data is the new oil. And this has kind of been the narrative that we've been told about, that you know, this is going to be the case, but this is just not true. So why is this not true? Well, oil's value is, as we know, it's valuable because it's scarce. And as we also know, data is anything but scarce. There's literally data bashing around everywhere. So, okay, forget about data being the new oil. Let's talk about data, and specifically, you know, Halo, we're a brand first agency. We help clients with their brand. So why do we think there's a role for data in a brand? So, you know, we work with marketers a lot, and there is obviously a role for data-driven marketing. It might be a phrase that you know well or don't know well, but, you know, data-driven marketing statistically is on the up, and I'm sure you've come here for the really interesting content that is statistics. So, you know, 88% of companies say that it helps them understand their consumer. 53% say it makes them more consumer-centric. 75% say that it sees an increase in engagement with this data-driven marketing. So data can be useful, great. You know, it can help you target your audience. It can help you create your SEO. It can help you highlight places customers are dropping out the purchase funnel. So for marketers, data, really, really useful, but boring. Boring. So what we like to think about is, okay, yes, data's got these kind of analytical benefits for marketers. It helps kind of identify, it helps optimize, but don't use data like a drunk man uses a lamppost, more for support than illumination. The quote I've attributed to someone, because I don't know who said it, but somebody said it. And I think this is kind of the point about data that we kind of want to get to. You know, yes, it's useful, but it's everywhere. So we need to worry about the data that's vital to what we want to be doing. We need to interpret the data. It's not the answer in itself. And this is the kind of key, and particularly when it comes to brand relevance, everything's about relevance. Because essentially, when you're talking about a brand, and you're talking about what you mean to people, if you are irrelevant, people are indifferent to you. And if you're a brand, indifference means you're screwed, basically. If no one cares, if no one's interested, if you're not getting someone's attention, you're done. Be relevant in the selection, role, and application of data. Okay. But we're a creative agency as well. You know, we do strategy, but we also do the creative. So where do we see data's role in the creative process? You know, we're talking about data plus creativity. So we think that, and we know that data can help activate a brand. Data can help create a brand identity, and data can help shape an experience of a brand. So why do we know that? Because we've done it. So a real world example, this is the real world, picture of the real world outside our windows now, but real world example. So this is from a few years ago, and there was being built I need to be very careful here not to say the actual name of the motorsport venue, because it wasn't actually built. So I am showing you work that has never been shown before, has never launched, because the destination, the venue, in the end wasn't built. So it was going to be built in the rolling Welsh hillsides. We worked with them on the strategy. We got to a point where they'd identified that, okay, you know, a big part of brand is, well, what makes us us and not someone else? Okay, natural landscape, Welsh hillsides, stunning natural landscape, rolling hills. And the other thing about their brand was it's all about cutting edge technology. So these two things, what the brand was about. We also looked into racing fans. Racing fans love data. They love their race data. You see that from all the, you know, the kind of coverage of racing, motorsports particularly. So we knew this was the case. So we had a motorsport circuit that was going to be shaped by the Welsh landscape. And so we created and worked on a visual brand identity that was shaped by data that the landscape informs. So what we had was we had a rider's telemetry data of a simulation of one lap of the track. And then we applied that data to an outline of the circuit to generate a dynamic visualization of one lap, and that became the brand identity. So circuit was the underlying structure. We then took the data, acts in a self-operating engine, so it flexes and responds to these new impetus. And I'm hoping that this video is going to work for people. Hopefully this should be moving. So you'll see that on the map of the track, that's the motorbike going around the track. The little balls that should be going up and down are the forces that are acting on the rider. And then from these, we created this dynamic, generative animation. We then, and if I can, stop that one so I can go on to the next page, because I'm hopeful that you actually heard some of the sound effects that we had to that. I don't know if people heard that actually. But what we created as their brand identity was a dynamic generative identity, which we had as a set animation, but we then also needed it as static elements. So it kind of rolled a little bit about the sort of branding. It rolled into all these kind of visual elements. Then also what we had was this kind of generative engine and this visual approach. So what that meant was, you know, a big part of circuits, motor racing circuits, is their track days, because obviously they only have so many races per year, but they do lots of track days. And then we could feed the live data of people doing a track day, doing a lap, into this generative engine to create live identities, live visualizations of people's laps around the track. So that might have been on race day or whenever. And we took this into all sorts of things. You know, the intention was that the trophies were going to be 3D prints of a part of the generative animation and all this sort of stuff. So what we gave them was this brand identity that was created and recreated by data from racing the track itself. So to kind of wrap up, might data be like oil after all? So what do I mean by that? Okay. I've got this kind of obsession with oil marbling that, you know, this creates kind of these beautiful and unexpected patterns, okay? And I think hopefully we all know what the oil marbling is. But the point about oil marbling is that it only does so by the liquid and the oil being contained within a framework. If there was no framework set, this oil would kind of just drift away and you'd get nothing. So the point is, design frameworks, not things. You know, we can allow data to explore options within designed frameworks, and what this does is it encourages and embraces unpredictable and the unexpected. And, you know, this is something that just adds another layer to this kind of creative process. This really is about letting go, but letting go within the frameworks that we allow. It's about giving data some room, but giving it some rules as well. We say that data and creativity equals unpredictable beauty. And that is the talk.
Did you hear that?
Thanks.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll just, Kerry, keep your mic on a second, because we've got a couple of questions coming in for you, Hannah and Paul. Hey, that was a seamless bit of audio. The other thing I thought was quite interesting, Paul, because I was like looking at screens when those motorbike noises came on. I thought that was you doing it in the background, to be honest.
Making motorbike noises.
Entertain.
I could have done that. That would have been cheaper.
I'd imagine all the effort, time. So look, thank you very much for your time. Now, Kerry, my technology, my Zoom abilities in the chat, there are some questions floating around somewhere, because I see one or two pop up, and I think, well, our audience is here. And I suppose the thing is about this, we have set a time, but if people want to hang around afterwards and converse, I'm sure people, if you want to stay, you can stay. That's fine by us. I'm relieved, to be honest, as much as I think, Kerry, that we've got to 4:45 in the event, and neither the technology's fallen over, nor has the dreaded Zoom bomber surfaced. Right? I'm beginning to think there's a lot of conspiracies flying around with the COVID times, isn't there? But I'm beginning to think that the Zoom bomber is a bit of a conspiracy theory. It's a mythic character that doesn't really exist. So, hey, if you are the Zoom bomber, you could go for it now, because you know we've done the hard yards and we're coasting all the way. So, Kerry, have we got a question there on the chat for Hannah or Paul?
Hannah or Paul. So we have. I'm just looking through.
I saw one from Kerry Ann about a tea wheel earlier.
She said there is a flavour taste wheel for tea if you need one. Hannah, she said, do you use a sentiment engine like the one Black Swan uses to gather information?
So no, basically. So that's it. Goodbye. No, no. It's a really interesting question, and Black Swan are interesting because we look quite similar to them on the surface, but we actually do quite different work, and we actually work with them sometimes for some clients. But I think this also kind of links to the other question that I think someone called Fleur asked about why we don't use social media that much. So essentially, because if you're an agency like Black Swan, the idea is that you pipe in huge amounts of data taken primarily from social media and use the algorithms to try to find numeric patterns or sort of sentiment that sit sort of on a macro level above that. So it's a very kind of quantitative, data-led analysis, and you can do some really, really interesting things with it and pull things out, but it's really, you want sort of that vastness of information so that you can see what's going to kind of come like out to the surface of that. Because we're working with much smaller data sets, only sort of 80 to 100 websites per market really, and the idea is to try and find that sweet spot where it's more than an individual would be able to read on their own, but sort of fewer than the whole of the internet, so that you can kind of keep it relevant. What we're really trying to do is just find these sort of like interesting creative nuggets that float to the surface. And like, quite honestly, social media doesn't like give you like, it's like some of the most interesting stretchy content that we find isn't necessarily what sort of people are posting on like Twitter and social media and things like that, but it's what's happening in sort of the really niche consumer forums where people who are really obsessed with coffee are just like all talking about the latest sort of thing in that, or it's happening in like a really interesting magazine article that you can then combine with something else. So because we're not just focusing on consumer voices, we want to sort of go broader than social media and not just focus on that. And quite like sometimes we get really interesting content on social media depending on the project, and sometimes we don't, because if it's a very niche category or consumers aren't interested in talking about it, we don't do that. And then because we're working with much smaller data sets, we don't do sentiment analysis in the same way. We do have a different platform that does a little bit of sentiment analysis, which is it's a sort of self-service platform where you could feed in a very small data set and then just read the stuff that's coming out, and we can do a little bit of sentiment analysis on that, but it's much more about sort of qualitatively assessing, well, is this a good quote, is it bad, is it interesting, and just sort of seeing what floats to the surface. Does that answer those questions?
Yeah, I think so. We've got one other one for you, Hannah. I think Paul's going to get off lightly. I haven't got any questions for Paul yet. But Hannah, so someone has asked about whether without AI, would it take longer for you to reach the insights that you are coming up with? Or is it more about the fact that you wouldn't be able to reach those results?
Honestly, it's both. I think acceleration is the sort of primary goal. So, and our tagline way back when used to be sort of about accelerating expertise or accelerating the discovery phase projects. Like that's what we really started in, is this idea of getting it quickly. But I think the toss-up of that is that if you accelerate the work that you're doing, then you get through the stuff that you would have got through anyway much more quickly, and then you can get add in the sort of really interesting, weird and stretchy stuff, partly because you've got that bit of extra time, and partly because the AI just throws up combinations of things that you might never have thought of yourself, and or sort of surprises you in what it brings up. And yeah.
Cool, thanks. I've got another question, which two people have asked actually, Kerry and Jez, and they are asking, if you're only focusing on experts, do you miss the way the market might be going? So for example, if you're just looking at coffee fanatics, are they not representative of mass audiences? So how do you sort of get around that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And like, part of the answer is that honestly we're not trying to be representative. I mean, it depends on the brief, and sort of if we've got a really consumer focused brief, we will put in more consumer focused sources. And we did actually have a project quite recently where we highlighted quotes which had come from niche sources versus quotes which had come from mainstream sources, so that you could kind of see both of those voices. So it's less about sort of missing the way it's going, and more about sort of trying to find that inspiration and trying to find that nicheness. But to a certain extent, we kind of welcome bias, because I think, and it's a whole interesting and really big conversation, but the sort of the view we take on it is that it's a very human analysis. The human who's doing the analysis is going to have a certain level of bias. So you're just looking about how can you capture that creativity? How can you use your personal bias to counter what the machine might be biasing? How can you sort of pull something interesting out? And the upshot of this basically means that 90% of my projects will have a theme about how this product links to women's natural menstrual cycles, and how you can integrate that into your product wherever possible, because that is my personal interest and bias. And you'd be amazed how many categories turn out to have that kind of link. So depending on who's working on your project, you get kind of different biases.
Great. And then one final question for you, Hannah. How do you handle the language side of things when collating and collecting all the data and content?
So we have a network of local language partners that are managed by some people who work internally who also have those language skills. So if we're doing a multi-market project, I'll give the list of sourcing areas and say, I want a number of Japanese sourcing Japanese parenting blogs, or interesting whiskey brands, or event spaces. And then they'll go out and find those sources in the original language, and then we'll put it into the machine, and the machine uses automatic translation to centralize all of the analysis into English, which is about as good as automatic translation is. So sort of pretty good for most languages. Occasionally runs into some interesting sort of creative interpretations. And we use Microsoft for European languages and Google for Asian languages, because we've just found that the quality is better respectively for those. So yeah, that's how we do it.
Great, lovely. And we do have a question for you, Paul. Are your creative colleagues open to using data as a source of inspiration? I think it's a big question.
Yeah, that is a really good question.
To get your take on that.
So, I think, well, the short answer is it depends. It depends on the person. I think that creative people are generally quite bad at letting go. So they want kind of control. They want to kind of deliver the answer in inverted commas. And so I think there's that kind of puts people off. I think that there's a bit of it depends how au fait they are with data and digital work particularly. I think from my experience, the more people are into and understand digital, the more they understand data, the more they understand that it might have a role as a creative element. I mean, to be honest, I've seen this kind of thing tried in a few other occasions, and in my opinion, it worked really well for the motor racing circuit, because it was really, really relevant to the brand, to the type of business it was, to the type of thing it was, to the type of fans that there would be. I mean, it all worked. I think that either creatives don't get it at all, or the few creatives that there are really obsessed with data and try and shoehorn it into anything, and that's even worse. So, so I think that yeah, it's a difficult one because it does mean letting go of control a little bit and allowing a little bit of kind of randomness in, I guess. But yeah, which a lot of creatives don't really seem to like to do.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think that is all of the questions. So I think we're going to wrap up. Norts, have you got anything else to say?
I've always got something to say, but you're going to land this baby, Kerry Harrison. I will say a big thank you, by the way. Well, remember to Tiny Giant Derek, who's been there quietly in the background, hasn't he? Well, actually, he's on screen. I'll give him that. But he's been piloting this. He's been piloting this ship. And oh, the screen appeared there. Don't know what happened there. It's all gone mad. But yeah, big thank you to him. And it's all gone chaos at the end.
I think it might be me. I was
just for then, after I said we'd all gone so well without that Zoom bomber, and it's you actually testing our defences. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. On behalf of me and us, but obviously Kerry, Toygan as well, thank you for getting in touch there, for being with us in Istanbul and all that. Amazing. Anybody else? There's WhatsApp groups. We'll put a thing out. The other thing, Kerry, of course, is that we've recorded this, haven't we?
We have, so we're gonna share it with everyone who, with everyone.
So I am personally, I'm going to hand the reins over to you to wrap
cool.
everything.
So I just wanted to say thanks very much for being here. We're really grateful for you to have so many faces here. It's really lovely, and also as Norts was saying, it's just really nice to see people from all different places, because obviously we're based in Bristol and we do get people coming up from London and all over the place, but it's really nice to see so many people from all around. Thank you so much to Hannah and Paul, really lovely presentations, and thanks for all the questions as well, some really good ones there. And last but not least, our next one, as Norts said earlier, is on the 21st of May. It's another virtual one. So again, if you want to sign up to that, go on to Eventbrite and search out for Alphabet Southwest and you'll find us there. So thank you very much. Be kind, stay home, save lives, and take care of yourselves. It's again, just thanks for being here. It's great.
Are we allowed to give ourselves applause? I don't know. That's a.
I reckon I'm just going to do it again because it's just been.
Why the hell not? Thank you, everybody. Catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
See ya.
Laters.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, DG.